Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you are all doing okay. Thanks for being here. My name is Carlos Malet. So what is the purpose of the session for today? Well, it's not going to be a full lecture on the causes and the consequences of COVID-19. I selected 5 ideas for us to think, and we could be talking about dozens or hundreds of things that are happening in the world and that may be accelerated or may change slightly because of this pandemic. But essentially, I just selected a few of them, okay? And so I would like to share with you some thoughts about the role of China and how things that are going on in China for the last 5 years may get an additional push by this pandemic. And a concept that has been going on for some time in journals, in papers, and in the media, that is reshoring. And this is linked to some of the flaws that we have seen in logistics and in the supply chains during this crisis. A global look on the world, so what's happening in society, and a special look into how the world is a global ecosystem is getting richer, but the distribution of wealth is not equal. And a couple of things on technology, so how technology is going to impact the future of jobs and how we live. Okay? So let me start with China. So everything started in China just a few months ago, in January, right? And you know that China has been going through a massive restructuring in terms of politics, economy during the last years. And not many people knew that there is actually a significant strategy in China to transform the economy that was built around manufacturing for the whole world into being a leader in technology. That's what we call Made in China Project 2025. That it's a strategic project from the Chinese government. Just to give you some context, if we look at the data in terms of growth of the main economies in the world, you see that United States absolute GDP is still the leader in the world with about $20 trillion in annual GDP last year. The European Union is close, but not at the same level. And in Europe, we have been struggling since the financial crisis. I'm just going to zoom in since 1990 until now to make it more clear. China has been growing significantly, especially, and that's very interesting, since the global financial crisis. Okay, so what was a major crisis for the whole world actually looks like it has not affected China in particular. If we take a look at annual growth for these economies, you see that, well, the United States and the European Union growing at something between 2, 3, 4% annually, obviously with the situation we had after the crisis with negative growth. China was not affected by that. In 2007, it grew at 14%. That's massive. It was never in recession. 2018, it still grew at 6%, so 3 times the growth of Europe, for instance. So that's why China has been picking up and becoming one of the main economies in the world as of today. Apart from the numbers, there is something it's going to be accelerated in the next months of years. The United States are going to be hit harder than China. If you read the news, the Bank of America already says that 20 million jobs are already lost or about to get lost in the coming weeks, which is unprecedented in the history of North America. hitting double-digit unemployment, which has never seen in that country, and the prospects of recovery are still slim. So some people were talking about a fast recovery, a V-shaped recovery for the States. Some people begin to think that maybe we have a slower recovery with a U-shaped type of recovery. These are some of the prospects for China. If we take a look at the numbers of all Asia, if things go as expected, even this year, China will still grow at 2%. In a worst case scenario of very, very slow recovery, China will not actually go into recession. And for 2021, we expect a growth between 5 and 8%. So China seems to be dealing better with this situation. And that comes on top of the strategy that China has been following since 2015, the project that they call Made in China. So what is Made in China? Made in China is the project of essentially the idea of the main leaders of the Chinese government, the President Xi Jinping and the Prime Minister Li Keqiang. And Made in China is a strategic global project for the country in which China wants to become leader in technology in 10 key sectors. They go from information technologies into agricultural machinery or power equipment. 10 key sectors for the world to come. And these are some of the KPIs that China has described for this project. So in 2025, they want to have a significant increase in leadership, in providing their local market with the supply of these key sectors. The blue bars is the domestic market share of technologies and products right now in 2020. In pink, we have the goal for the Chinese government with MIC 2025 for these strategic sectors. So for new energy vehicles, for instance, 80% of the consumption in China has to come from internal technologies, internal sources. New and renewable energy equipment, which seems to be strategic, right now they are lagging. So they expect again to have like 80% of supply developed in China. So again, the 10 key sectors that are going to be key for the future of the global economy, and specifically for the economy of China, they want to be leaders, they want to be dominating those technologies, they want to be supplying the inner market, and whatever is left to be sent abroad for export. Okay. One example of this transformation is the city of Shenzhen. Shenzhen was a city of fishermen just a few years ago. It has been transformed in just a couple of decades in what is known now as the Silicon Valley of hardware. If Silicon Valley was developed or they grew as a hub for innovation in digital technologies, now the equivalent for hardware is the city of Shenzhen in the Pearl River in China. It's a massive hub of universities, talent, companies, all together, building an ecosystem that is developing technologies for the future. And it's hubs like this that they are going to be driving the future of China with the strategy of MIC Made in China 2025. Next, reshoring, a concept that has been going on lately, especially in the news, because we have had massive shortages of products when the borders were closed, or when economies said that some strategic products, they had to remain in the home countries. Examples that we have seen in Europe, for instance, and for my Spanish colleagues, we have seen that some companies, they had to start manufacturing products that we were lacking. Automotive companies like Seat or Renault, this is a worker of Renault, transforming their equipment, their 3D prototyping machines to produce protective equipment like face masks. Okay? So the logistic chains have been disrupted. And when this thing happens, people start to think if the logistic chain should be rethought and if countries should bring back some of the production that has been sent abroad during the years to find cheaper sources of production. It's very interesting for the scholars, the academics, that if you look at the number of citations of reshoring, and I just was looking into our online library of our university a couple of days ago, nobody was publishing about this concept until 2010. And then all of a sudden, the citations about bringing back production, reshoring appear in the scientific literature. And that means that there are people noticing that something is happening in the world, and they begin to study if it makes sense, finding patterns and analyzing the underlying reasons for that thing to happen. So it's a new world, it's a new concept that it's appearing in society. You all have heard that President Donald Trump has based most of his campaign in claiming that jobs in America should be for the Americans. So this is again reshoring, bringing back jobs to the nation. But if you actually look into the news and into the archives, this is something that already started with the Obama administration. So you look into 2015, just before the elections that brought Mr. Donald Trump into the White House, and Obama was already saying that, well, with his policies, 11 million jobs were brought back to the States that once were in Asia, for instance, or in countries with cheaper labor. It's only that Mr. Donald Trump, and we have to give him credit for that, he was much more intelligent, so to speak, in making that a political message. So this is just exactly the same message that Mr. Obama was saying to 2015, transformed into a political message by Mr. Trump in 2016. Bring jobs back to the Americans. And if you were listening to the news today, you heard that Mr. Donald Trump is now canceling the green cards to make sure that when there are new jobs available in the States, they are going to be done by Americans and not by immigrants. So again, it's bringing back production that once was sent outside for cost reasons into the local countries. And then with the new features that, when we have a major crisis, if having production abroad is disrupting logistics, this creates a strategic disadvantage. Technology is going to play a significant role in bringing back production. I love this video that I'm going to show you, in which some technological advances now provide countries with an advantage because now machines can do the job of people. So it's the cost advantage is no longer existent because you can substitute people by machines doing the job. In this video we show how advances in 3D prototyping, that is much faster, transform labor force, or cheap labor force, into obsolete, because it's only machines that are doing the job.
Welcome to Carbon. We're a technology company changing the way the world makes things, specifically 3D printed things. We didn't start out trying to change manufacturing forever.
We didn't?
No, we didn't.
We started with the simple goal of making 3D printed parts better.
It's 25 to 100 times faster, which is game-changing.
But we quickly realized that with our combination of technology and materials, we could make real parts with mechanical properties and surface finishes that make injection molded plastics obsolete by comparison. Embracing the idea that speed to production isn't an obstacle anymore. It's the only way forward. And our partners share our enthusiasm for reinventing the rules. Partners who are manufacturing at scale, making millions of real products.
Like us?
Yeah, like you. In partnership with Adidas, we've created a midsole that shouldn't exist so that they could make a shoe that shouldn't exist. Light, super flexible, highly durable, and printed straight from liquid. A marvel of design and function, this shoe defies logic. And whether you want to make 1 or 1 million, this is true, customizable, and on-demand mass manufacturing. This is not a publicity stunt. This is a revolution. And we're just getting started. Stop prototyping, start producing.
So with advances like 3D printing that goes not just for prototyping, it goes into actual production, then the argument of we need to look for sourcing with cheap labor force becomes obsolete. Now leaders can produce anywhere in the world. They can switch back production to the United States or wherever, because machines are going to be substituting humans, so you bring back production. Pretty much like we did in Europe when we needed facial mask protection, and we started producing them with 3D printing in companies where they were manufacturing equipment for automobiles. Okay, now let's look at people. I have some good news and some bad news regarding society for coming years. Good news is that absolute poverty, people living in extreme poverty, is going down. By all estimates that we have from United Nations or from the World Bank, all the estimates say that by the end of the decade, people living in absolute poverty, and that's people living with less than $2 or $3 per day, is going to be zero or almost inexistent. So that's good news. And we achieved that in 40 years. So we went for about 40% of people living under those extreme conditions into zero. So humankind should be proud of that achievement. On the other side, we see that also the middle class, people that can spend money buying things, is growing. So if in 2009 we had around 2 billion people with enough money to buy things, by the end of this decade, in 2030, we are going to have close to 5 billion of people with enough money to have a comfortable life. However, the growth in wealth of the world is not equally shared by all of us. So the top 1% of wealthy people are capturing much of the wealth that is produced in the world. It's a little bit sad to see that today, less than 30 people in the world have the same wealth as 50% of humankind, the lowest 50% of humans living in the planet. Only 30 people have that same amount of wealth. And this is a trend that is general. So most of geographies are growing in a way that is not equal. It's not equally shared by all citizens. So what is the problem? We have some economists that say, well, exactly, that's the question. What is the problem? Martin Feldstein from Harvard said, well, inequality, it's only a problem if it is associated with poverty. So if the world is getting better, if there are less people living under extreme conditions, why should we care about inequality? There are other people that say, well, inequality is a problem in itself, especially in developed societies. And for instance, Mr. Richard Wilkinson, Professor Wilkinson, has done extensive research in showing why we should care about inequality. I find the work of Richard Wilkinson extremely interesting. And I strongly recommend that if you only have 10 minutes to go through that work, you look into the TED Talks and you watch one of the videos of Dr. Wilkinson. Just to summarize, let's take the most developed economies. Economies with GDPs and per capita in the range of between 20,000 and 40,000 US dollars. And if you try to plot and to find a relationship between some social indicators of welfare, and in this case, Mr. Wilkinson found an index that is a combination of things like life expectancy, obesity, mental illnesses, and so on. You try to correlate that, and there is no correlation. It doesn't matter if the average GDP is 20,000 or 40,000 US dollars. But if you try to correlate the same indicator with inequality, you see a strong correlation. So societies with a high inequality, and United States, unfortunately, is one of the representatives, tend to have much more social problems than societies with lower inequality. And this is just an average of that index. But if you look into the work of Mr. Wilkinson, you will find that you see some repeated patterns. For instance, presence of mental illnesses correlates exactly with income inequality, or the number of homicides. And in this case, if you try to correlate that with the inequality, even of different states in the same region, like Canada and the United States, you see that correlation. And if you read the complete papers of Mr. Wilkinson, you will see that the number of births for teenagers, the level of literacy, there is constantly a correlation, not with actual income or with GDP per capita, there is a correlation with inequality. So how can we explain that? Well, the summary essentially is that it is not entirely true that inequality only matters if it creates poverty. We should start changing that mentality. What we see is that in developed societies, inequality creates frustration because people compare. And even if you have the basics for living, how you are seen and how you compare with each other matters. And this is the explanation that Mr. Wilkinson and his researchers find, that inequality creates stress in people, even if we are talking about highly developed societies. So it is something to take into account, something that politicians should eventually take into account when they develop social measures for their respective countries. Next, so we talked about the role of China. We talked about inequality, the new concept of reshoring. I want to give you a couple of hints about technology and why we should care, and why some things that are happening in the field of technology may be even accelerated after this crisis. The first thing is you have heard about advances in artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. I wanted to focus on the Internet of Things and then on the effect on robotics on society. If you're really interested in what is the Internet of Things and the impact on society, I strongly recommend you this book by Mr. Kranz, Messier Kranz. He's Vice President of Corporate Strategic Innovation at Cisco, so he knows what he's talking about. This book is excellent, Building the Internet of Things. And just to recap, well, the Internet of Things is not science fiction. It's something that is happening right now. It's going to be key as a strategy for the future of companies and for the future of the working force in the next years. You all know what the Internet is, right? So we are connected through a massive net with our devices. But in the traditional Internet, we still need the human factor. So it's us humans with a device, a laptop or a smartphone connected to this massive net. In the Internet of Things, humans are not relevant. So we have just machines connected to this net and talking to the other machines. And typically we may have something here that is, for instance, what we call a sensor that is collecting information, is sending it to the Internet. There is some processing here, and then it sends information to another device that we can call an actuator that does something. Okay? And there's no human intervention there. So the Internet of today already has this loop. So we have people and machines connected through something that we call the Internet. And sometimes we don't exactly know if we are connected to another people or to a machine. and machines don't care if they are connected to another machines or to people. So this is the actual internet as we are building. There has been some jokes in the past that, well, the classic example of the Internet of Things is the intelligent fridge that will detect when we run out of milk. It will send a signal to the grocery shop, and then a new carton of milk is going to be dispatched automatically to our door without human intervention. That may be true, that may be in the coming future, but I would say that at this moment it is not relevant for business. So what is the relevance of the Internet of Things? It's in what's happening in companies. Industries are going through some transformation in which we have teams from IT working with teams in operations and building new value propositions. According to McKinsey, most of the wealth that will come from these projects will be concentrated in predictive maintenance and increasing inefficiency in factories. So these machines doing things without human intervention will create a wealth between 1 and 4 trillion American dollars in the future. And it's going to come from companies like Rio Tinto, a mining company. It's just one of the examples. These trucks here from this company, from Rio Tinto, they are the basics of the business of this mining company. These are massive machines. They have to keep running constantly. So if one of these machines stops because there is a failure, there is a breakdown, for every day that one of these machines stops, the company is losing $2 million per day. So they cannot stop. The way to prevent that is to have these trucks loaded with hundreds of sensors that they detect what can go wrong before these things even happen. And as soon as there is something that may go wrong in the next coming hours or days, the company takes actions and they prevent a breakdown that will last for hours or days, okay? Rio Tinto is a global mining company with operations, for instance, in Australia, difficult country for mining. I'm just going to show you how these trucks operates in Australia.
You have to travel far into the Australian outback to look into the future. Here in the dust and intense heat, they're digging for iron ore. These trucks work 23 hours a day. Each load is almost 300 tons. But look closely, there's no one behind the wheel. And it's not just driverless trucks modernising mining. 30 of these trains, each 1.5 miles long, head to port every day. So what's driving the move towards automation?
We get productivity gains, and of course all of this ends up being more cost competitive as well.
These futuristic pits haven't pleased everyone. Critics say the mining boom is behind Australia's strong dollar, which is hitting manufacturing and tourism hard. The cost of living has shot up, but the reality is Australia's fueling China's expansion, and there's little sign of that slowing down. Jonathan Samuels, Sky News in Western Australia.
And of course, these trucks are driverless. So apart from being loaded with sensors, they run automatically. It's going to be very complicated to convince someone to work in these mines. So you just remove the human factor. Okay. Having things connected through the internet is going to bring some challenges. The main challenge is going to be cybersecurity. If you look, for instance, at the current cyber attacks that are happening through traditional computers, there's a live map of the number of attacks that are going right now in the world. Hackers trying to go into the computers of other people to steal their identity or their cards. So we have been fighting that for some time. The next level of threats is what's going to happen if you can actually attack an industrial site. And this has been already done. This is the first acknowledged example of the first digital weapon. In this case, it was designed by the United States and Israel to try to slow down the nuclear program in Iran. So they detected that the nuclear plants in Iran, they were connected to the internet and the machines were connected there. They wanted to stop the program in Iran in 2010, so they designed a virus that was acting directly into the machines, into the systems for enriching uranium. This file has been declassified by the United States of America, and the virus is known as Stuxnet, the first digital weapon of the world. So Stuxnet essentially was acting on the machines in the nuclear plant. It was producing a malfunction in 1,000 centrifuges that were enriching the uranium as fuel for the nuclear plant. And the plant had to shut down. And they were trying to figure out what's going wrong. They didn't know that it was a cyber attack on hardware, and the nuclear program in Iran was delayed for 2 years just like this attack. We have seen other examples. We don't know if this is just playing around or experimenting, or what we can do in a world where machines are connected. So the blackouts in Ukraine in 2015 and 2016 were created by attacks of hackers that were causing systems to fail, not just stealing identities or stealing money from computers. So this is the main threat of machines getting connected through the Internet of Things. Additional challenges: machines are generating tons and tons of data. The trucks that we have seen from Rio Tinto, loaded with sensors, they generate up to 5 terabytes of data per day, which is massive. And most of those terabytes are just saying, system is okay, system is okay, system is okay. So only one tiny fraction of that information is useful to make decisions. So we have new challenges. The challenge is that we need to find information from tons of data, tons of bits. And this is becoming challenging. When you have to handle that much amount of information, coders have problems. Writing lines of code is becoming more difficult. So the next level is that machines should learn, should find patterns, should find information by themselves, what is known as machine learning or deep learning. This is one example. You may have heard about the company DeepMind, and a startup in UK that started it in 2010. DeepMind was leading the way of the wave of machine learning, in which you force machines to find the rules by themselves with human intervention. The model that they were using back in 2010 was, how can we make a machine learn how to play a video game? They used this old video game from Atari, the War Breaker, in which you have to hit a tiny ball. You can only are allowed to move your this left and right. You have to hit the ball, and the ball has to hit the wall, and you break these bricks. The code that they developed, it only gave the machine the message that you have to somehow find the rules to increase the score. Nothing else, not even the basic rules on how the machine should play. So what happens if the machines start playing with the code that you are providing to the machines? The machine can play randomly, store every play, and then find rules after that. At the very beginning, the machines is very clumsy. If you compete with the system, you will always win because the machine doesn't know the rules. So it will miss most of the time. It will not hit the ball, so you can easily beat the machine. After a few games, and after analyzing the different games, the machine finds the basic rules. And the basic rule is that you have to hit the ball. It took the machines 2 hours of analysis of the information to find the basic rule. And now humans are at a disadvantage because the machine will hit the ball 100% of the time. So it's impossible to beat the machine now. And remember, you didn't tell the rules to the machine. The machine had to find them by itself. And 2 hours later, because the goal is to increase the score as fast as the machine can, the machine develops a strategy. And now, after analyzing the different games, the software found that if you are able to make a hole in one of the corners, then the score will increase much, much faster. Okay, so finding the basic rules took 2 hours and developing a strategy 2 more hours. Well, DeepMind was bought by Google in 2014 by 500 million. So the team at DeepMind is working now with Google in the division that is known now as Google DeepMind, and they are developing software for machines to learn because humans are now unable to develop certain lines of code. So machines have to find to be able to develop those rules by themselves. Okay. Basic message, well, this is happening already. The Internet of Things and the consequences for businesses are here. It is not necessary that we learn about deep learning or machine learning. It is not the job for most of us. Just know that this is happening in companies. And if you are a manager, just make sure that the company understands that we need people proficient with these new technologies. Otherwise, our company will become obsolete much, much faster than in the past. And I'm coming to the last concept that I wanted you to reflect on. So apart from connected machines, we have more and more robots. Okay? And this is what the section that I call robots should pay taxes. Some visionaries, they predict that up to 2 billion jobs will disappear in the next 10 years. If that number is accurate or not, we shouldn't really care. I mean, but the trend is there. There will be a massive loss of job or transformation of the job market because of automation and because of advances in technology. Jobs like drivers for buses, trains, subways, even taxis, they are under threat because of the future driverless cars, for instance. Certain activities that machines can do well, they are threatened as well. You may have seen videos, there are plenty of them, about the robots of this company, Boston Dynamics. Humanoid-like, yeah, some of them very scary. This was very popular. Showing, this is a prototype, of course, showing what the humanoid-like robot can do. And so there is the advancement of robotics goes very, very, very fast. Actually, it's interesting because yeah, the big companies always try to get bigger and bigger and to take advantage of every technology. Alphabet, Google, when they saw the capabilities of Boston Dynamics, they bought them already back in 2013. Unfortunately, 3 years later, they decided that it was not a strategic fit. And believe it or not, the main reason for selling it back again was because many managers at Google said that Google didn't want to be associated with the scary image of the robots of Boston Dynamics. Okay? And they put it back on sales. These were two of the companies that were betting to buy the technology of Boston Dynamics, Toyota and Amazon, for obvious reasons. Amazon, yeah, automating logistics and distribution, Toyota for their business to build cars. In the end, it was SoftBank, a giant technology company from Japan, that bought Boston Dynamics. SoftBank is the actual owner of the technology and the team right now. And companies like Amazon, they decided to take another route. They already have their own division of robotics, Amazon Robotics. And these are the robots that they developed. They didn't need the humanoid-like looking robots of Boston Dynamics. They need something more efficient. The robots that you see here are called the Kiva robots. These tiny robots can move up to 1,000 kilos in a warehouse. The beauty of this system is that you can transform any warehouse into an automated warehouse. You don't need to build static rails with cranes moving around. So just putting 100 robots in a warehouse, it will move things automatically. They talk to each other, they interact with each other, and they move in a synchronous way. Consequences of that, already back in 2018, because Amazon just put the Kiva robots for test in one of their warehouses in the States, hiring of people for Christmas season went down by 20%. So when typically Amazon hires 120,000 more people for the Christmas season, with the Kiva robots in one of these warehouses, they could go down to just 100,000 extra hires because of the increasing efficiency of these automated warehouses. There are plenty of other examples where you can find robots. This a startup in the States, Construction Robotics. They are building robots for construction.
Construction Robotics was founded in 2007 with a goal of bringing robotics and automation to on-site construction. We started Construction Robotics and we decided to build a robotic brick laying system. There were two fundamental problems we had to solve. The first one is how do we handle the mortar? The second one is how do we accurately place a brick with a robot? Robots are typically bolted to a concrete floor where everything is very predictable around it. When you go to a job site, everything is dynamic. You take a robot, you put it up on a mass climbing work platform, and it's moving around very dynamically in the wind as people walk around. So as the robot goes to the wall, it's going to follow that. Well, we built a sensing system that looks at a laser that's mounted to a building and corrects for any movement that that platform.
So we already have prototypes of robots that can build walls. I'm sure that Mr. Donald Trump is going to be happy because if he ever builds his wall between the States and Mexico, he can bring the cost down. This is just a statement of Mrs. Alison Carnworth, chairman of Land Securities in the United Kingdom. She says that robots in construction will have a significant impact worldwide. These are just the numbers in the UK. So after the crisis in 2007, 2008, about 300,000 jobs in the UK alone were lost to the robots in the construction market. The market has been going up. Now it's obviously going down because of COVID-19, but it will not recover because when the market is again going up, we will see more and more robots taking the job of people. Okay. So the question, and this is just the last slide, and this is not pure speculation. Even at the European Commission, the question is, if we are going to be losing jobs to robots, that means that companies that can afford robots, they will get more profitable. We are going to be laying people off. Some of these people will never come back to the job market. So should we start posing the questions? The question if, should robot pay taxes so that if we don't have a job, should the wealth that is created by robots be equally distributed with people? And with that, I'm going to finish my session today. And just you can start open your microphones. And again, remember, I would propose that if you have questions, you may use the chat as a primary source of communication. I will be reading your questions and recommend some. Okay? And I'm showing myself. I have been hiding during the presentation, but I'm back. Who has the first question?
It's a combination of fascination and anxiety.
So when you want to pose a question, I would ask you to introduce yourself and then say the question. We have someone with a contribution from Peter Ragull. I have a contribution on inequality. So, Dr. Ragull, you want to open the microphone and share with us?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you, Carlos, very much for your your discussion and your presentations, because really all those issues will be, and they are in fact today, important key drivers for our future. I have only a simple contribution regarding the inequality, because my feeling and my thought is that in the future, inequality will not be only measured by economical terms. For example, by the average annual income of a person or a family. Because with this dramatic growth of, for example, the middle class, right, that you have pointed out very, very correctly, the inequality, in fact, will be not the difference in income, but will be the difference in the resources that we have at our disposal, depending on the country or the continent where you live. For instance, even today, if a person has an income of, for example, $50,000, this income is totally different if you have this income in Norway, in Spain, or in Peru. Because, for example, the educational resources, or the medical resources, or the social resources that you have at your disposal in Peru, in Norway, or in Spain are totally different. So in my opinion, inequality in the future will be more focused and more dependent on all these resources rather than only the income that a person or a family could get. That's all. Thank you again for your explanations.
That's a very, very good point. Equality of opportunities. That's very, very significant. And just to reflect on what's happening now with, for instance, education, which is our field. So suddenly we found that, well, if we cannot send the students to schools or universities, we have the technology to give remote teaching, right? And then all of a sudden, we realize that there are people in our societies that then they don't have those basic resources. And we start thinking, well, maybe connection to the internet should be like a basic right. Because if you cannot be connected to the internet, you cannot receive education in situations like this one. So you have a clear disadvantage. And again, this is availability of resources. In countries where, for instance, they are going to be in lockdown and there is not the possibility to provide remote education right now, they are going to be facing a major disadvantage to countries that, that can do that. So again, yes, that's correct. Availability of opportunities, and that means some resources, yeah, helps increasing or decreasing this gap in equality or inequality. That's very good. Natalia has a question. So Natalia, yeah, if you want to phrase the question out loud, you can open the mic.
Yes, thank you. I'm Natalia from Colombia, and I wanted to ask you if the environmental politics are also a trend for the future management or the future managers. Thank you.
We didn't touch about environment, sustainability. Well, it has to be in the agenda for all of our politicians. There has been for years now an increasing pressure on having real politics on sustainability. Unfortunately, they enter in conflict with some short-term politics for growth that some of the superpowers used with short-term visions. But definitely, I mean, COVID is something that will pass. We have limited resources. And sustainability with global strategies for the planet has to be very, very, very high on our agenda. Otherwise, we will not have a future. That's clear.
Thank you.
More questions? Suggestions?
So, if may I?
Of course, Ricardo, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Ricardo Aguirre. I'm just a retired employee of Boehringer Ingelheim and currently member of the board of the IQS, Association of Former Students. And I'm very much, well, thank you very much for your presentation. That's what's really very nice and beautiful. And I like very much the idea of robots paying taxes. It's not the first time I heard of it. And I wonder, how do you think it may be quantitized? Because it seems to be something that may be some just solution for society income, but not easy to handle.
You're completely right. Well, on one side, we have politicians, they can propose things. On the other hand, they get elected, right? So they have to measure the messages that they send to society, because if they are not elected, well, they cannot implement their politics. And robots paying taxes, it's a complex message, very complex message. You know that sometimes to get the attention of people, of the voters, you need much more simple messages, as we have seen in the past. I think it's also companies, especially big corporations, need to consider that as a need, strategic need for survival. And why I'm saying that? Well, essentially in our system of capitalism, where we produce and we sell, we need people to buy, right? And if inequality grows and grows and grows, and robots are taking the job of people, and people have no money to buy things, it's easy to understand that at some point the system will collapse. So if you want to accumulate the wealth in half a dozen of companies and the rest of the world cannot pay for those products, I mean, the system is going to implode. There are already some billionaires in the world, some trillionaires in the world that are warning that I mean, a society cannot exist with a healthy middle class people that has the purchasing power to buy the goods that companies are producing. So it's a nonsense to try to accumulate wealth if then nobody is going to be buying your products in the future. At some point, there has to be a tipping point in which companies realize that, and then society realize that, and then the politicians are empowered and have the authority to implement these measures. It's easy to say. Of course, it's not going to be easy to implement. When a company right now it is implementing robots to become more efficient, they do that because it's a strategy for survival, to be better than competition. So the last thing that they want to hear today is that they are taxed so that they lose the advantage that they got when they invested in automation. But at a certain point, we as a society, and that will include companies and politicians, we need to think about the global strategy. I don't know if that answers your question, Ricardo.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And you've been in a multinational like myself for many years. I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Well, in fact, it's not an easy topic, but as things go, we've somehow have an evolution from the 19th century with a massive workforce to a very much technological world. So I think the responsibilities for somehow social responsibility should be reallocated in a way. And that's, as you say, it's a combination of politics, technology, and business. And it's a difficult thing to put together. So I think it's a challenge for future.
That's correct. That's correct. It's a challenge, but yeah, some has to be. The world has to be breaking off, and that includes. I would say that it includes first companies which have the economic power, and then together with politicians to come up with new ways of looking at the future. Otherwise, as I said, there are some voices already telling that there are alternative ways of dealing with the future, just by increasing these differences and by getting more and more competitive. If in the end, I mean, it's Just a very simple mathematical question. If you produce a lot, but nobody has the money to buy the products from you, what is the purpose of that? The system is not going to work. Then, if there are no more questions, then we can close this session. And today I selected 5 topics to initiate some discussion and to give you some food for thought. We may have some additional topics in the future. If that's all, if there are no more questions, first of all, I want to thank you very, very, very much for being here. If you happen to have any additional questions and you want to address them to IQS, we'll be happy to get back to you, and I will be happy on my side to answer any questions or to connect with you in the future if you want to discuss further on these topics or on similar topics related on sustainability, society, and technology. Okay. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and thanks for coming. Thanks for being here today. And I wish you all the best for the remaining days, weeks, or months that we have of lockdown. Take care, be safe, good luck for the future.